Fellow Sazaitas, it's been a while since I gave you guys an update. I apologize for missing in action. Sometimes, life happens. But the purpose of this update is not really just to talk about recent political developments in Zimbabwe. I also want to help you understand why what is happening, or rather, why what happens in Zimbabwe happens at all. Why has it been so hard to remove ZANU-PF from power? Why is ZANU-PF seemingly scared of a referendum when it easily wins elections year in, year out, whether by hook or crook? Why is the fat man always pictured with the president, even on official state business? Is he now the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe? Or does he have some ministerial portfolio that we haven't been told about? And why do we keep seeing very wealthy business people joining the leadership structures of ZANU-PF, particularly the Central Committee, which is the highest decision-making body outside Congress? Well, fellow Sazaitas, slay queens and Mbingas, socialites, papalites, vasinamalites, varikudya rice, never sinama rights. Welcome to the special report. The 90-day consultation phase for Bill number 3 has now come to an end. The bill will soon be formally introduced in Parliament for debate. But whether or not this process will eventually lead to a referendum is a different discussion altogether. Behind this entire conversation lies a much bigger issue that many people are failing to understand. To properly understand Zimbabwean politics, you must first understand what ZANU-PF actually wants Zimbabwe to become. The sooner we come to terms with this reality, the better for everyone. So Taffy, what is this reality that you speak of? Well, the reality of the matter is that ZANU-PF is a vanguard party. And a country ruled by a vanguard party cannot be a thriving democracy. The concept of a vanguard party was popularized by Vladimir Lenin, the founding leader of the Soviet Union. So what is a vanguard party? A vanguard party is a political party which believes that it understands the people's true interests better than the people themselves. Because of this belief, the leadership of this party believe that they have the right to guide, to lead, and to rule on behalf of the masses, whether the masses agree or not. ZANU-PF, just like many other liberation movements, adopted this way of thinking. A vanguard party does not mainly focus on listening to what the people want. Instead, it believes its job is to direct society towards what it considers the people's true interests, even if the ordinary person does not agree or understand. This mindset places the party above democracy. And since the vanguard party believes that it has a superior understanding, ordinary public opinion becomes less important and can even be seen as dangerous. You become a puppet of the West for simply criticizing. You become a sellout emutengesi for simply demanding accountability. The idea is very simple. We fought and sacrificed in the bush, so we understand the course that the country must follow better than everyone else. We died for this country. So ZANU-PF doesn't view elections as the true source of legitimacy. They view them as something secondary, something that must simply be managed. That's why when ZANU-PF is almost losing power, like what happened in 2008, they unleash violence. And when they get criticized for the way they manage elections, they call election observers puppets of the West. Real political competition is always seen as a threat because the party views itself as the permanent leader of the nation. Because of this mindset, the party is constantly using different strategies and political tricks to weaken or destroy the opposition. A good example to this is what happened after the 2023 elections. You see, even though ZANU-PF had failed to win a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly during the election itself, it later gained that majority through the recalls of opposition MPs carried out by Sengezo Chabang. Those recalls gave ZANU-PF a 2/3 majority, and that 2/3 majority opened the way for the Constitutional Bill number 3, which is just now about to be introduced in Parliament for debate. But while ZANU-PF was succeeding in consolidating its dominance over Parliament, another problem was emerging at the center of power itself. In fact, this problem had already emerged in 2017 with the coup. You see, unlike Robert Mugabe, whose authority inside both the party and the state was largely unquestioned for decades, President Mnangagwa inherited a far more fragile political environment after the 2017 coup. This point explains much of the problems that we as Zimbabweans have had to endure since 2017. Let me unpack this. You see, the 2018 elections were the first elections held after the coup that brought President Emmerson Mnangagwa to power. And while President Mnangagwa struggled in the presidential race of that election, winning only 50.8% of the vote, ZANU-PF as a party still managed to secure a 2/3 majority in Parliament. But that 50.8% result is politically significant because it revealed the fragile position of a man who had just taken over power via a coup. When people came out in the streets and marched in November 2017 during the coup, Zimbabweans were not necessarily supporting Mnangagwa himself. Many were celebrating the departure of Robert Mugabe. So, the large crowds that we saw during the 2017 coup should not automatically be interpreted as proof of deep national support for Mnangagwa personally. In fact, his narrow and disputed 50.8% victory in the 2018 election strengthens that argument. It suggested that the excitement of November 2017 did not fully translate into overwhelming electoral support for Mnangagwa. That 50.8% was the lowest winning margin ever in any Zimbabwean presidential election. Throughout Robert Mugabe's presidency, he usually won by very big margins. His lowest winning margin was 56% in 2002. His highest winning margin was 83% in 1990. Of course, all his victories were heavily disputed. But then again, all Zimbabwean elections were disputed, especially since the year 2000. The point I'm actually making is that Mnangagwa inherited and used much of the same political machinery that Robert Mugabe used. That same machinery that gave Mugabe victories of over 80% is giving Mnangagwa just a 50.8%. Mugabe's lowest winning margin, 56%, is higher than Mnangagwa's highest winning margin, 52%, which he got in the last election. So the point is, the same system that is giving Mnangagwa narrow 50% victories is the same system that was giving Robert Mugabe 60 to 80% victories. Mnangagwa's narrow victories reflect the fragile nature of his political support. That fragility was born out of the fact that his administration came to power through a military coup. That coup itself was the result of vicious factional battles within ZANU-PF. The party had become very fragile. It was that fragility that caused Mnangagwa to suspend elections at his first ZANU-PF Congress as leader in 2017. You see, at a time when the party had just emerged from destructive factional battles, allowing internal elections carried the risk of reopening divisions that had already pushed the country into a military coup. It was this same fragility that almost claimed Mnangagwa's life during the 2018 election campaign, where he narrowly survived an assassination attempt. And it is this same fragility that later resurfaced in calls for his removal by some war veterans led by Blessed Geza. So Mnangagwa came to power leading a party that was deeply divided and politically unstable. It is therefore not surprising that he later concentrated power around himself and a small circle of very trusted associates as a way of securing his position. It is also not surprising that Mnangagwa recalibrated, reshuffled, retired and reassigned military generals as a way of securing his position. So since taking over power, Mnangagwa has had 5 different ZNA commanders, 3 different CIO leaders, 2 different police commissioners, and 2 different ZDF commanders. In contrast, Robert Mugabe had only 4 ZNA commanders in 37 years. And here, I'm not counting Sandy McLean, who was a transitional commander until August 1981. So Robert Mugabe, 4 ZNA commanders in just over 35 years. Emmerson Mnangagwa, 5 ZNA commanders in less than 9 years. He is simply securing his position, removing threats from influential positions and surrounding himself with a small inner circle of very trusted individuals. Over time, that inner circle has become closely linked to extremely wealthy individuals whose financial and political influence has grown so large that in some cases it now appears to rival or even overshadow the party itself. These wealthy individuals provide large amounts of money to buy loyalty from ZANU-PF structures, celebrities, socialites, papalites. The goal is to make Vasinamalites and Vasinamarites to remain dependent on the ruling elite. That dependency syndrome is what creates, or rather allows, Mbingarism to thrive. So in a country where Mbingarism reigns supreme, even powerful politicians have a price. This allows Mnangagwa to consolidate loyalty within both the party and the state through patronage networks built on money, access, business opportunities, and political protection. So loyalty is no longer sustained only through ideology or liberation war credentials. It is now increasingly sustained through financial dependence and personal benefit. It is no longer exclusively about whether you died for this country, because money can now cover that gap. This marks a clear change from the Mugabe era. Under Robert Mugabe, business people often financed the party in exchange for political protection. but the party remained clearly in charge. The party remained supreme. Under Emmerson Mnangagwa, some businessmen have gained more power and influence than before. They buy expensive cars for party officials. They sponsor events and help secure support in ways that place them at the center of power. Millions of United States dollars have been spent to buy influence and create an image of public support for Mnangagwa. Influential voices are given cars and are then encouraged to speak well of the president or simply stay quiet. So when these celebrities and influencers are given cars and money, whether they then campaign for Mnangagwa or they simply stay silent and not speak out against injustice, either outcome helps maintain Mnangagwa's position. Remember, it is all about securing Mnangagwa's position. But while Mnangagwa governs Zimbabwe differently from Mugabe, at its core, it is still the same ZANU-PF system that has been in power since 1980. And the reason this system has been so difficult to remove is not unique to Zimbabwe. You see, with the exception of a country called Guinea-Bissau, and you can let me know in the comment section if I am missing any other country, but really, across Africa, many political parties that came to power via armed struggle have remained dominant long after independence. The pattern is the same across countries such as Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, and even Zimbabwe itself. In all these countries, the liberation movements that fought during the armed struggle eventually became the ruling parties after independence. In Algeria, it was the FLN. In Angola, it was the MPLA. In Mozambique, it was Frelimo. In Namibia, it was SWAPO. And in Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF. I deliberately excluded South Africa because, although the ANC came out of an armed struggle, it did not fully rebuild the state security apparatus around its military wing after taking power in 1994. Instead, it simply inherited the colonial military system. The ANC has not tied the military to its political survival in the same way ZANU-PF has done in Zimbabwe. So that is why, in my considered view, the ANC will become the first of these former liberation movements to lose power via democratic elections. Keep in mind, when I say these former liberation movements, I'm talking about the liberation movements that waged armed struggles, whether sustained or not. By the way, in Kenya, there was an armed struggle for independence led by the Mau Mau fighters. But when Kenya became independent, the party that took power was KANU. It was led by a man named Jomo Kenyatta, the father of Uhuru Kenyatta. So this party that took power at independence in Kenya is not the party that fought for independence via armed struggle. This party actually distanced itself from the armed struggle. It distanced itself from the Mau Mau fighters who were waging an armed struggle for majority rule in Kenya. It is my submission that had the Mau Mau fighters themselves formed the first government at independence in Kenya, they might still be in power today. It is extremely rare for a political party that came to power via an armed liberation struggle to lose power to another political party. This is true in Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia, Mozambique, and Algeria. Secondly, in many of these countries, the army does not see itself as politically neutral. Instead, it sees itself as the guardian of the liberation struggle and the protector of the party that waged that armed struggle. We have seen this pattern before. In Algeria, 1991, The ruling FLN party was losing badly to an opposition party during the elections. The military then intervened. It cancelled the election results, removed the sitting president because he was prepared to work with the opposition, and effectively took control of the country. So by removing a sitting president and cancelling an election, the military was protecting its interests. Zimbabwe has also experienced similar moments. In 2008, when Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF were losing, the military stepped in, took over political campaign for the runoff election, and secured victory for Mugabe. Then again, in 2017, when internal factional fights inside ZANU-PF began threatening the interests of senior military leaders, the army intervened directly in what became known as Operation Restore Legacy. The military presented the intervention as an operation meant to protect the revolution and remove criminals around President Mugabe. But if we are to be honest, it was just the military protecting its own position, influence, and interests inside the state. So, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason why ZANU-PF behaves the way it does. We speak of democracy, but the reality is that ZANU-PF does not want the kind of democracy spoken about in Western countries, where political parties regularly lose power through elections. What ZANU-PF seeks is a guided form of democracy under a dominant party system, where a small and powerful ruling elite determines the direction of the country, whether the population agrees with it or not. That's why I've always argued that the problem in Zimbabwe is not the law itself. The problem is ZANU-PF's unwillingness to follow the law. To be honest with you, I have never fully understood why Zimbabwean opposition leaders are so obsessed with demanding for reforms. What makes them think that ZANU-PF will obey new reforms when it already ignores the current laws? I mean, for goodness sake, do you know that it is already illegal for the ZBC to openly favor the ruling party? That is in section 61. Do you know that it is already illegal for chiefs to campaign or openly support a political party? That is in section 281. Do you know that the Electoral Act prohibits vote buying through money, gifts, or food? Did you know that section 208 says that serving military commanders are not supposed to make political statements or openly support political parties? Did you know that section 219 says that the police are supposed to be professional, impartial, and non-partisan? Yet, all these things have happened and are happening in Zimbabwe as we speak. The illegality has become so normal that people barely react to it anymore. It is now normal for the ZBC to openly favor and support ZANU-PF. It is now normal for serving military generals, commanders of the ZNA, to publicly support ZANU-PF. So the question becomes, what exactly will reforms achieve if the real issue is the refusal by ZANU-PF to obey the law as it exists in the first place? But this does not mean that opposition parties themselves are blameless. But too often, opposition leaders have played directly into ZANU-PF's hands through strategic mistakes, internal divisions, and leadership ego. All opposition leaders, from Changirai to Chamisa, BT, Washman Ncube, Wende, Scala, Kupe, you name them. They have all played into the hands of ZANU-PF, one way or the other. But even with those opposition mistakes, the deeper issue remains ideological. ZANU-PF fundamentally believes that it is the only political party with the right to govern Zimbabwe. That is the foundation of the system. Constitutional Bill number 3, in my view, is simply a mechanism to remove the inconvenience and fragility of direct presidential elections, especially at a time when Mnangagwa struggled to dominate them politically. So, whether it is presented as efficiency, policy continuity, or development, the overall effect is the same. Avoiding a referendum and concentrating more power in the presidency helps reduce the political risks that come with direct elections. Direct presidential elections can become a problem because they sometimes expose the gap between how the ruling party sees itself and how the public actually feels. In a normal parliamentary system, power is supposed to shift more towards parliament, with the president functioning more like a prime minister who is also the head of state. But in Zimbabwe's case, the opposite appears to be happening. More power would become concentrated in the presidency itself. The president would be able to appoint the prosecutor general without meaningful consultation. He would be able to appoint judges without the need for public interviews and appoint additional senators, all on top of an office that is already extremely powerful. The point, ladies and gentlemen, is to help you understand the nature of the system itself. Once you understand the nature of that system, you stop being shocked by its behavior. You stop asking, why does ZANU-PF do this? And you start asking, how can people who seek change deal with a party that believes that it has a right to rule? You see, you cannot spend 40 years believing that you are the sole guardian of the revolution, the sole defender of sovereignty, and the sole liberator of the country, and then suddenly accept the idea of losing power through elections. That is not how liberation movements think. That is why every serious political challenge is treated like a threat to survival. That is why the military remains deeply involved in politics. That is why elections are fought so aggressively. That is why critics are often called puppets of the West, agents of regime change agenda. That is why opposition parties are divided, infiltrated, and weakened. That is why wealthy businessmen have become so important to political survival. And that is why the Constitutional Bill number 3 matters. Because this bill is not isolated. It is part of a broader political trajectory. The tragedy with Zimbabwean politics is that many still analyze events in isolation rather than seeing the system as a whole. But systems matter. Ideology matters. History matters. And until Zimbabwe confronts the real nature of the political system built after independence, the country will continue spinning in circles, pretending to move forward. But whatever happens, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.